Welcome to this explainer. Today, we're diving into one of the most intense, visceral accounts of aerial combat and survival from the entire Falklands War. We're talking about a story that perfectly blends brutal technological clashes, sheer human endurance, and a chain of events so rapid and unforgiving that it's going to leave you right on the edge of your seat. Okay, let's just drop right into the middle of this harrowing moment. I want you to picture this. You're inside the cockpit of an A-4 Skyhawk. You are Argentine First Lieutenant Héctor Pipi Sánchez. You've just pulled off an incredibly dangerous bombing run, right? The adrenaline of success is pumping through your veins, and then, in an absolute fraction of a second, panic violently interrupts that joy. Missile in the air! Missile in the air! It's the sound of a successful mission instantly transforming into just blood-curdling fear.
So, how exactly did we arrive at that terrifying radio transmission? We need to trace the incredibly fast-paced events of June 8, 1982.
Before the real dogfight kicks off, think about the stark difference in hardware here, because it sets the entire stage for this clash. On one hand, you have the Argentine A-4 Skyhawks. They're nimble, they fly low, and they're armed with your traditional 500-pound bombs and 20mm cannons. But on the other side, the British Sea Harriers. These things are boasting Blue Fox radar and the deadly new AIM-9L Sidewinder missiles. It's a completely asymmetric matchup, and it's going to dictate everything that happens next.
Act 1. The bombing run. Invisible to radar, vulnerable to everything else.
Now, what is really wild here is the sheer physical danger these pilots faced just to reach their target. To completely avoid the British radar, the 4 aircraft of Mazo Flight flew literally meters above the ground of East Falkland. The jet wash was so incredibly intense, it forced British infantrymen on the ground to dive into the dirt. And as they popped over a rise, First Lieutenant Sanchez's plane ran right into a wall of tracer fire from British anti-aircraft guns in the gathering dusk. He's jinking his plane left and right, with bullets actually thumping into his aircraft. Hold on to that detail about taking ground fire, by the way, because it becomes absolutely crucial later on.
Pushing through that heavy defensive fire and pulling out over the sea, the flight leader, Danilo Bolzan, finally spots their primary target. Breaking their strict radio silence, he calls it out. Now, this wasn't one of the massive landing ships they had seen burning earlier that day. This was a Royal Marine landing craft. It was smaller, sure, but it was absolutely packed with valuable vehicles and commandos.
And the devastation that follows is immense, caused by just a single successful detonation. Bolzan lines up first, right? But his bomb release malfunctions. He drops one bomb and it misses by about 100 feet. But flying right behind him is Lieutenant Juan Arraraz. He drops his 3 500-pound bombs. Now, only one of those detonates, but honestly, that is more than enough. It strikes the landing craft, completely obliterating the stern in a massive, catastrophic orange fireball. In a flash, the stakes of this entire engagement have escalated. Act 2. Ambush in the sky. The hunters become the hunted. But here's the twist. While the Argentine pilots are celebrating their successful strike, they totally fail to spot 2 dark gray British Sea Harriers diving down from above. Royal Navy pilot David Morgan and his wingman David Smith had just watched their ship burning, and an all-consuming rage is driving them down. Morgan arms the AIM-9L Sidewinder. This is an advanced missile that literally sniffs out the heat of the Skyhawk's engine. A bright green diamond pops up on Morgan's heads-up display. You hear that solid locking tone, and well, this piece of technology just changes the dynamic of this fight entirely.
With a brilliant roar, accelerating to over twice the speed of sound, Morgan unleashes his first Sidewinder, instantly shattering the Argentine formation.
It is staggering how quickly everything unravels for the Argentine pilots here. In mere seconds, the adrenaline rush of a successful mission turns into an absolute nightmare. Ensign Alfredo Vázquez's Skyhawk is completely obliterated, scattering across the waves. Sánchez, reacting on pure instinct, actually lines up a perfect shot on Morgan's Harrier to defend his friends, but when he squeezes the trigger, absolutely nothing happens. Remember that ground fire? His 20mm cannons are totally jammed, knocked out from his flight over the island. Helpless, he then has to watch as Juan Arraraz is struck by Morgan's second missile. The jet is literally split in two, though miraculously Arraraz does manage to eject.
Now, out of Sidewinders, Morgan switches over to his twin 30mm Aden cannons to chase down the fleeing flight leader, Danilo Bolzan. But talk about terrible timing. Just as he prepares to fire, his targeting software glitches out. His windscreen goes completely blank. It was a known software bug, actually, but rebooting the system would take 10 critical seconds. He doesn't have 10 seconds. So Morgan is forced to fire blindly, running purely on gut feeling, trying to push the outline of the Skyhawk to the bottom of his windscreen before he runs entirely out of ammo in the gathering dark.
With his guns completely dry, Morgan has no choice but to pull back. He gets on the radio and seamlessly hands the pursuit over to his wingman, David Smith, who is already switching his own systems over to his Sidewinders.
And this handoff is just brutally efficient. Smith locks on instantly, he fires his Sidewinder. Flight leader Danilo Bolzan attempts this really hard break to evade, but it's no use. The missile effortlessly tracks him, destroying the aircraft. And this time, Sánchez watches in total despair as the remains crash into the earth. There's no parachute. The entire leadership of the squadron is gone, leaving Sánchez completely alone in the sky.
Act 3. A desperate escape. Running blind into the storm.
Powerless, weaponless, and actively being hunted, Sánchez has to make a life-or-death decision to shake these two Sea Harriers. He jettisons his external tanks, punches the throttle, and dives down to just 50 feet above sea level. He flies directly into a dark, heavy rainstorm with near-zero visibility. Now, he did this because the British Harriers' Blue Fox radar systems were notoriously bad at tracking low-flying targets, making this incredibly dangerous maneuver his only real hope to break the radar lock.
He is just getting violently buffeted by the wind, flying purely on his instruments. When he finally pushes through the storm clouds and the skies break, he eases back on the throttle and checks his instrument panel. And his heart just sinks. He realizes he has only 500 pounds of fuel remaining. To put that into perspective, that is basically fumes. It is nowhere near enough to make it back across the ocean to the safety of Argentina.
Act 4. The Mid-Air Rescue. A lifeline at 30,000 feet.
This next part is just pure, unadulterated suspense. Knowing he's going to crash into the ocean, Sánchez climbs to 30,000 feet to conserve whatever fuel he has left in the thinner air, and he sends out a desperate radio plea. Out of the gloom, a heavy KC-130 Hercules tanker actually risks radar detection to climb all the way up to his altitude. With his fuel gauge literally on empty, Sánchez inches his plane forward, slotting his probe into the swaying drogue basket. Contact. The fuel starts flowing, but then a terrifying realization hits. His gauge isn't moving. He looks back and sees a white stream of vapor trailing his wing. Remember those ground fire hits? His fuel tanks were ruptured. The fuel is just violently leaking right out into the cold air. His plane physically cannot hold the fuel needed to survive.
Dead silence falls over the radio. Standard procedure says there is absolutely no point wasting precious fuel on an aircraft that can't even hold it. Sánchez is just waiting for the order to disconnect and face the icy ocean. But instead, the tanker pilot makes a miraculous, incredibly dangerous call. He tells him over the radio, "Stay connected. We will take you home." Refusing to let him go, the Hercules pilot begins a slow, deliberate turn, literally dragging this crippled, leaking Skyhawk all the way back across the ocean to the Argentine coast.
Act 5. The aftermath and enemies turned friends.
Only when the runway actually comes into view does Sánchez finally disconnect. As his wheels touch down, his engine completely sputters out. He had used the absolute last drops of fuel. As he rolls to a stop and throws off his helmet, the devastating reality of what just happened finally hits him. Alfredo Vázquez and Danilo Bolzan were killed instantly. Juan Arras, who had somehow managed to eject, was tragically killed by the sheer force of that ejection. It's an incredibly sobering realization that out of the 4 men who flew into that dusk raid, Héctor Sánchez was the only one to return home.
Fast forward a few decades, and this story takes an amazing epilogue toward reconciliation. Sánchez actually reunited with David Morgan, the exact same British pilot who had shot down his friends. They spent hours together sharing a pint of cider and recreating the dogfight. In just a really powerful testament to humanity, Sánchez offered Morgan this incredible perspective. "Don't worry, David, we were just doing our jobs."
As we wrap up this explainer, it leaves us with something pretty profound to ponder. How does surviving the extreme, unforgiving crucible of human conflict eventually transform the bitterest of enemies into the closest of friends? The events over Bluff Cove show us the absolute raw devastation of war, for sure, but they also highlight this enduring, shared respect among those who fly into the storm. It's a true testament to the resilience of the human spirit. Thank you so much for joining me on this deep dive. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I'll see you in the next explainer.